And welcome back, listeners and bookworms. We have a ton of new Sander content for you today. But first, we are going to do our weekly Sanderson news. So, what have we learned in the last week? We've learned things are starting to ship. People are getting their Words of Radiance leatherbound shipping.
I get mine tomorrow.
Ooh, that's going to be sick.
Yes.
That's going to be great.
So hyped.
No real big announcements for Dragonsteel yet. There hasn't been any update, I don't think, on more of the things we can do at the con. I'm sure that'll come later this month. The backer kit for the Cosmere RPG is opening as we speak. Slowly, they're letting people in batches so that they can make sure everything's working correctly. Check your email, check your spam. If you're concerned about that, email them, but probably just wait because it'll be open. I think they said up until the end, up until Dragonsteel Nexus, backer kit will be open. Joining me today is the Sandbox, aka Trevor, just like every other Monday's serialization of the Wind and Truth. Griff could not join us today, and I am unavailable the rest of the week, so here we are. And if Sandbox has to dip early, then I will continue on by myself. I will try my best to imitate their voices, though it will last probably 5 seconds, and I'll break out laughing. Oh, wow. I can mark clips. Nice. I'm going to try that whenever I have to mess up, or whenever I have to mess up. Okay. Trevor, right before this, you were talking to me about two horror games, or two neat little games. So
I'm going to share them
up on the screen.
So this one is called Psycho Killer. For fans of exploding kittens, this is that, but you're trying to survive a psycho killer slasher type of thing instead of an exploding kitten. It's a little bit different, but that's pretty much the base game. This other one is called Witchcraft. This is kind of like another game called, I think it was Resist, where you're like kind of in some like Spanish war, I forget. But this is like you are pretty much a coven of witches trying to convince 3 jurors that you're using your witchcraft for good, not evil. And it's resource management. It's very hard. It's kind of like Munchkin, Dungeons and Dragons meets Catan meets Salem Witch Trials. So very good games for the spooky season if you are looking for something. Witchcraft you can do kind of by yourself. It's a solitaire game. Okay. Psycho Killer, you need at least 2 people. So,
is Witchcraft, can you play it with more than one person, or is it just one person?
You know, I think there's other game modes you can do. I think it is made for one person, but you could probably do like a team. Just strategize with a team.
Rare to get just a straight solo game. Nice.
Yeah, they're rare, but it's something I've been looking out more for because I don't have a lot of people to play with.
Oh.
but it's also just how I grew up. I was an only child, so I grew up playing like both sides of a checkerboard, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
Always trying to best myself, but yeah, I like those types of games.
Yeah. For sure.
It's good to get off the screens too, you know.
That's real.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what you're currently reading briefly.
Same thing as last week, Dresden Files, book 6, Blood Rights.
Blood Rights, getting through it.
My favorite of the ones I've read so far. But
nice. Nice. I am still reading Ghost Station. I am also reading.
How is that?
It's really quite good. It is third person present tense, so it has that feel, that kind of rushing forward feel. I've tried to write in that tense. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. I am doing it right. I'm not sure if it's the right feel for the story I'm trying to tell. That doesn't.
It feels more like how I would write notes for a story, not how I would write this story.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, but it.
He grabs the knife. He does the thing. You know.
Yeah, I think what it presents is for the reader a sense that the characters don't know what's happening next, whereas if it's if it's a past tense.
Yeah,
you have the sensation that something is happening that has already happened. So
right.
The ending is set in stone. Whereas if you're reading it present tense, it's kind of figuring itself out on the way.
Well, I like how you explained it originally. It feels like you're rushing forward, like the stakes
Yeah,
would feel a little bit higher. It does have that quickened
yeah.
pace to it. So, yeah.
Especially for horror.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that
That's
helps.
good.
Hollow City from Dan Wells, that's first person. That's first person present.
I still have
And
that on my open tabs here ever since you mentioned it like a year ago.
nice. Nice. Brilliant.
I need to get it. Yeah.
And I'm also listening to The Stand by Stephen King, the
Are
extended
you?
version. Yeah.
How is it? Because I just got like the Barnes and Noble edition, and I'm like, soon.
Yeah,
But
no, it's the narrator's great, the characterization is great, the plot is great. Everything's
is
really
it
solid.
slow? Is it? I know it's like an
It
epic. So
right, right. It so
does it read slow to you, or
it
are you
doesn't
in it?
it doesn't so because I'm listening to it, I feel like I get a different feel. It doesn't feel slow because it jumps through more than a dozen points of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um and it's like little vignettes that are all connected by a central thing happening,
Yeah.
and then I assume at some point they'll start coming together. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's really interesting. I have a long commute, so long reads are great.
Nice.
Yeah, is I think that's it before we dive into chapter 21.
I think so.
I think so as well. Okay, well, if that's the case, I will start doing this. But first, Shalon, 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 Shalon. Okay. Chapter 21. Incomplete Truths. First, I dared not to tell them this dusty traveler with whom they shared a meal was in fact that very king they had heard of. The second was that I did not explain that very king had abdicated his throne and walked away from his kingdom. From The Way of Kings, fourth parable. Shalon and her team, the best she had without Vatha and Ishna, who were still in Shadesmar, spent the next few hours planning. Then it was finally time. Her team of 5 made their way to an oath gate outside Urithiru, hiding among a larger group of soldiers being transferred to Narok to reinforce it. She led with outward confidence, though deeper inside she acknowledged she was terrified. Mraze and Eatil had manipulated her before. They had a nearly supernatural understanding of politics on Roshar, including the politics between gods. Where other groups had made bids for kingdoms, the Ghostbloods made bids for worlds, or for control of economic forces as big as those worlds. This was what terrified Shalon, not the things that she worried they'd do, the things she was too ignorant to worry they'd do. These thoughts haunted her, accompanied by anxiety spread as light flashed around them and they transferred to Narok, the city at the center of the shattered plains. It had been a year and a half since Dalinar's fateful expedition and the events that had summoned the Everstorm. Since then, Narok had become a fortress. With stonewards, they'd expanded the Oathgate platform a good 10 feet. Then it and each of the central cluster of plateaus had been turned into a defense bastion lined by soulcast walls, attended by troops in towers. A light-eyed captain shouted at them to get moving, seeing Shalon and the other 4 as just another squad of spearmen. They hiked off the Oathgate platform with the others, entering the new ring of ground around the plateau where people could wait their turn to transfer. Here, Shalon and her team broke off, heads up, acting like they belonged. They crossed the bridge to Narok 4, a nearby plateau that had its own towering circular wall. Looks like a chowta roll, Red said from behind her. What are you on about? Gaz said. The walls around these plateaus, he said, makes them look like a bunch of chowta rolls. You know, open at the top, stuffed with meat. And we're the meat? Darcira asked, her voice masked by a light weaving to sound masculine. Sure. They're too stocky to look like chowta, Darcira said. More like shale brick ridges. Oh, tree stumps, where the center has rotted out. Or, you know, Gaz grumbled, like the war camps, where we lived for years? Oh, yeah, Red said. Circular walls, Darcira said. Soldiers everywhere. Nah, don't see it. You two are buffoons, Gaz said. I should have stayed a storming deserter. At least out in the wilds, everyone was too depressed to make small talk. Shallan hushed them as they reached the end of the bridge, where they presented falsified orders to the sergeant and scribe on watch at the gate. Darcira had waved them into existence on a sheet, a perfect replica. Though Shallan, via Adolin, had permission from the bondsmiths, she wasn't going to trust anyone she didn't need to. Anyone here could be in Ghost Blood employ. The sergeant waved Shallan and her group through, and they entered Narak 4, a distinctive plateau covered in ancient buildings once so enveloped in creme that they'd look like smooth mounds. A little creative application of shard blades had unearthed the original stone buildings, providing room for barracks and a small marketplace, carefully regulated by Navani and the military. Shallan and her team made a show, for the sergeant idly watching by the gates, of walking to their assigned barrack. They came out on the other side wearing the faces and clothing of crumb scrapers, the easy-to-ignore, lowly workers that kept a place like this clean. As they moved into position, they were joined by Jane, a Riran woman whom Shallan had recruited to the Unseen Court 8 months ago. She had been sent ahead to watch the Ghostblood hideout. They're continuing to gather, Brightness, Jane said softly, also disguised as a crumb scraper. I've seen 5 or 6 people enter the building over the last half hour. Shallan nodded. Reports said someone was at the doorway, using black sand to check everyone who entered. That made light weaving tricky, as the sand could reveal uses of radiant powers. To maintain their disguises, her team began leveling a patch of road near the hideout with chisels, removing the creme, plants, and lichens that grew up on the stone. Gaz used posts with string between to section off their working area, diverting foot traffic, letting them chat without worrying about being overheard. Shallan took the role of foreman, walking around, checking on the other 5 as they worked. In reality, she watched that hideout, a supposed storehouse of no importance. 2 more people arrived, including a shorter, uniformed Alethi man she recognized from Hoyd's sketches. The second was a member of the Azish Prime's retinue, a vizier even, though not one of the very important ones like Nora. Shallan took a memory of him, so she could add a drawing of the man to their stack. Mraize had rarely let Shallan meet anyone but him, isolating her from what was proving to be a distressingly large network, including people among most of the major political organizations on Roshar. The best she knew, their primary goal was to find a way to begin shipping Stormlight off-world, but that, though likely a potential source of great riches, seemed too small-scale for Mraize and Eatil. The front door of the hideout had a sheltered porch, with a dark shadow just inside. When each new Ghostblood arrived at the door, a short, cloaked figure stepped from the shadows and inspected them. Shallan caught a hint of a painted wooden mask, and the shape of the figure looked female. That confirmed Darcira's observations. It was either Eatil or, more likely, the woman among the other 2. The door guard inspected each of the 2 newcomers by touching their faces to check for discrepancies in their features. Then, they held up a jar of black sand. Shallan huddled with Darcira, Gaz, Red, and Jane as they labored. They pretended to be working on a particularly stubborn section of ground together while Yene kept watch. Their spren had instructions to ride on the insides of clothing to remain hidden. All right, Shallan said. This is our last chance to back out. This won't be like infiltrating the Sons of Honor, Gaz added. That group was already dying when we put them down. This might be the most dangerous organization on the planet. I worry we should go to ground, hide from them, wait out the coming storm. I'm not sure we're ready. What do the rest of you think? Shallan asked. I think, Red said, that nobody ever feels ready for big operations. Storms. You think half those boys on the walls feel ready to fight a war? The question isn't if we're ready, but if it needs to be done. Gaz grunted. That's true, I suppose. Red, you need to stop saying things that are smart. You'll upend my entire opinion of you. Red smiled, continuing to work with his chisel, scraping away creme. He had experience with tools like this, having trained as a craftsman during his youth. I think our plan is good, Darcira said. I say we move forward. She was an unusual one, a scientist who had shown talent for light weaving and left the Ardents to join Shallan. She was the only one in the court who tended to draw logic spren as often as creation spren. I'm worried about how many people are in there, Jane said. Shalon, you will be completely outnumbered. Do we really need to do this? In just over 8 days, Shalon said softly, Dalinar Kholin will fight the champion of Odium to decide the fate of the world. The Ghostbloods, best we can determine, are the most dangerous secret political force on the planet, so they're going to be involved somehow, Red said. They'll have some plan to compromise the contest. I'm in. His spren hummed from where he rode on the inside of Red's jacket. Array didn't say much, and as far as Shalon had been able to tell, he didn't hum when he tasted lies. He seemed to like alliteration, of all things. Maraise and Eotil are accustomed to the luxury of darkness and shadow, Shalon said. We need to expose them, naked for the world to see. So long as they have a monopoly on information, they will control us. And if we're always reacting to them, never attacking, they will beat us. She paused, some of Maraise's own words returning to her memory. Prey can only ever run. It can survive, but it can never win, not so long as the predator lives. Sure, Gaz said. But we could just send the Radiant Strike Team in. I hate relying on Windrunners for anything other than transportation, and then they still usually find a way to squeeze in a lecture or two. But we could defer to them this time, Shalon. We will use them, Shalon said. But Gaz, if we bring in soldiers first, then my gut says Maraise and Eotil will find a way to escape. Even if they don't, they'll never talk. We could throw them in prison for a decade, and those two would keep their silence. I need to know what they're planning. I need to get into that meeting. She'd learned some of what she'd hungered for, yes. Kalek and her own recovered memories gave her pieces, but there was so much more. Worlds worth. She thirsted for the chance to at least once hear them talking freely. Beyond that, they were planning something. Why was that woman spying on Dalinar? Why did they want Ba Edo Mishram? Would bursting in with swords out and powers ablaze stop their plans? Maybe, maybe not. It depended on what pieces were already in motion. Storm it, Gaz said. You're right. I'm in. Gaz and Red were among her oldest friends, and among their most experienced Lightweavers. She knew Gaz well enough to tell his objections were real. He was concerned about this mission, but he was also objecting in part so that the concerns could be voiced, then overcome. I'm in too, Jane said, though the real danger is to you, Brightness. I can handle it, Radiant said. We are a go, then. Hopefully they haven't started discussing anything important. Her team had talked about this. The Ghostbloods couldn't bring everyone over through the Oath Gates at once. A group would draw too much attention, and since the attendees were still trickling in, she hoped Maraise was still waiting. Darcira covertly checked her clock, which, like many scholars, she wore on one of Navani's arm bracer fabrials. The next Oathgate transfer is a bit over a half hour from now, and our surveillance spotted a few important members of the Ghostbloods, at least ones that Wit thought were important, hanging out in the grand entryway of Urithiru, as if waiting their turn. They're likely to be in that next batch, which gives us just enough time to set up Phase 2. Let's work for a few minutes longer, Gaz suggested. Else it's suspicious we set up here. Shalon nodded in agreement and started to actually scrape. It was surprisingly hard work, but she did get a particularly defiant rockbud free, forcing her chisel underneath and finally prying it loose. A low rain had started to mist the air, though after the high storm last night, the next wouldn't be due for a few days. Weather had been odd since the coming of the Everstorm, and rain like this was more common. Pattern hummed softly from within her jacket, though she couldn't tell why. This next part would be difficult. She'd never heard of that strange black sand before their planning meeting earlier, but apparently it had been used to spot hidden spren toward the end of Urithiru's occupation. Whether the sand was in jars with guards or sprinkled along the inside of windowsills, it would change color if any intelligent spren came near. Lesser spren apparently weren't noticeable, but cryptics absolutely would be. Worse, it revealed light weavings. Shalon wasn't terribly surprised. She'd seen Wit use something similar once, and had always wondered at the mechanics. Unfortunately, it meant she had to do the hardest part without her powers or her spren. Time to move, then, Shalon said, standing. Let's go. And we're going to break there at the chapter break. to talk about that section because this is a long chapter.
Oh yeah.
All right. We've got Shallan moving into position. I was quite pleased that we didn't get a scene of them planning. I think this was the right move to do, to just kind of be like, hey, they planned, now they're going.
Yeah, yeah. Set the landscape, set the scene, understand the players.
Absolutely. We're seeing more of the
Hmm.
black sand. We
I like
get
seeing more of the relationships between Shallan and the Unseen Court. Just how like she's kind of leaderish, but not in the same way that Kaladin was.
that's
And she
true.
finds a way to connect emotionally with each member, and you can sense that they all kind of look up to her and like value her opinion and stuff. So
Yeah, it's a good group, and they've got enough personality to each of them that you can really tell which character is which.
yeah, I like Red. I'm still not sold on Gaz, but that's because of like Way of King stuff and Words of Radiance. Just
Yeah, I
what a
mean,
jerk.
I'm not super sold on Gaz,
Hmm.
except voicing him like I do, I am, because it
Yeah,
sounds really, really weird.
Darcira, I do like, and little tidbit, she is one of the write-in characters.
Is she really?
What
Oh,
is
is
it called when he
I
something ization? I can't remember the word term that he
Tuckerization.
uses.
Tucker,
Tuckerization.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's a Tuckerized character. It's I think someone that's I think on the editing team, but also someone that's in the beta reader group.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, yeah, so kind of work for both people.
Nice.
Darcy, I think. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Cool.
yeah,
That's neat. There's not,
yeah.
I mean, we didn't get a bunch of like new information. We did get what the Shattered Plains kind of look like now under Alethi control with built up
Hmm.
defenses.
And then the black sand, which you were about to mention.
Yes, we do see more black sand. That's going to be pivotal here in a moment. And from a text Griff sent earlier, he wonders
Hmm.
if there would be a way to light weave so that the sand kept looking black even if you used investiture around it. I expect we are either going to see that happen exactly, or we are going to get a specific reason why that wouldn't work.
I don't know. I was of the inclination that they would try to get rid of the guard in the front. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good thought. I does the black sand. It depends if it's able to kind of similar to aluminum or silver, whichever it is, kind of stop investiture, or if it's just there to identify it.
Right. I think it's just there to identify it.
Okay, yeah, because that would potentially work then, unless they put like silver in it.
Oh, yeah, that would, yeah,
If
I
it's
can
like
see
a
that.
blend, an
Sure.
alloy.
Whoa. Whoa. An
Whoa.
alloy of investiture. The first Mistborn Era 3 book confirmed. Boom.
But yeah,
No,
that's a great thought, Griff.
that
Um,
is. And
Very
then
crafty.
we do see Shallan just taking the blunt force way around it, I guess, in a way, um, by just not having her spren and not having any investiture. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen.
It's definitely building up the stakes. You know, I think we see her go into the meeting like this. We're gonna get some info,
That
but
would be
then I'm
good.
sure there's gonna be like a oh, we've been found. Let's get
Yeah,
out. And
yeah,
then big oh there, yeah.
this is going to be
Um,
exciting.
it'll be cool. Yeah,
All
I have
right,
theories, but I want to see more before I start spouting them out.
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there
Uh,
anything else in here?
I don't think so. It's really, really the calm breath before the storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to go on to the next part?
Let's go on to the next part.
Sweet.
Yeah. Chapter 21, Part 2. Sigzil did his best to pretend he was Kaladin. He stood tall during the long strategy meeting that followed the initial discussion of the monarchs, and he tried to act like he understood more than he did. Kaladin was always so sure of himself. He always knew the next step to take. Sigzil couldn't do that, but he could pretend enough to keep the anxiety Spren away. Act like he belonged among monarchs, generals, and the storming prime Akasiks of the Azish Empire. Sigzil's mother would laugh at him. He read the amusement in her letters. Him? A military man? Her studious little boy, so delicate and refined? Even in Azir, he'd been made fun of for his persnickety ways. Yet, here he was, shoulder to shoulder with a group of generals. Someone, he whispered to himself, is going to eventually discover I'm a fraud, won't they? You're not a fraud, Vienta, his spren, whispered to him, remaining invisible as she often did. I'm a failed scholar, a mediocre world singer, and a persnickety perfectionist who drives the others up the wall. Did you survive Bridge 4? Yes, he whispered. Through pain and storm, I survived. Then you can survive this. But to lead them? He asked. What do you think, she said softly, was the result of that pain and fire? You are a leader now, Sigzil. You are a hero. Live that truth. As the meeting moved toward a break, Sigzil found himself standing with Kamakal, the Thaylen prince consort, at the edge of the large glowing map. What I don't get, Kamakal was saying to Ka, the Windrunner scribe, is where their troops came from. Across the room, Bright Lord Dalinar, Brightness Navani, Queen Yasna, and Queen Fen retreated to a smaller chamber to discuss something sensitive. The Azish Prime had left a short time before to return to his city. He wasn't generally involved in detailed battle plans. Their troops get reborn, Ka said, poring over the scout reports. She made notations with her silver pen, one of the most interesting uses of a shard blade among the Windrunners to date. It had a cartridge to fill with ink and everything. She chose to wear a blue hava embroidered with the Bridge 4 symbol on her shoulder, one of the new uniforms Kaladin had authorized. There was an Azish-inspired one as well, which Sigzil could have worn. Their most recent recruits were from all across Roshar, and Sigzil himself had made the point that the Windrunners shouldn't be perceived as an Alethi group. So why didn't he wear that instead of the uniform he'd been given all those months ago? Was it because of the tattoo on his forehead? Bridge 4 was the only place I ever felt like a person rather than an accident, he thought. But without Kaladin, Rock, Teft, Moash, was it really Bridge 4 anymore? All he wanted was to be back at that fire, sitting with friends and listening to Rock gently make fun of him for counting the chunks of meat in bowls of stew to make sure everyone was getting proper nutrition. Bright Lord? Kamakal asked him. Is everything all right? Yes, Sigzil said, clasping his hands behind his back, forcing his attention onto the logistics. You were saying they have too many troops? I think Ka is correct. Their fused can be reborn. They'll always have more troops than we do. True, Kamakal said. But with the number of fused marching on the shattered plains, those troop transports coming for Thaylen City will be filled with ordinary singers. They'll be thrown out at our battle lines like bait to be caught up in our nets. Poor souls. They have to be running out the frontline soldiers, don't they? Apparently not, Ka said. How do we distribute our windrunners? Sigzil? Thaylen City will need at least one squad, maybe an entire company, Sigzil said. The enemy will probably move some skybreakers to the shattered plains, now that the blockade is broken, but an air force will guard those troop transports during the crossing. So we should be ready to match them once they reach Thaylen City, to not cede air superiority. He wished they had more variety to their radiant forces. Yes, they had windrunners and edge dancers aplenty, and a growing force of stonewards and lightweavers. The other orders were largely empty, though. The enemy will have a difficult landing at my homeland, Kamakal said. That's when they'll be most vulnerable. We'll burn the docks and lay hole rippers in the shallows. When they land, we'll go back to the walls. They smashed those open with Thunderclasts last time, Ka noted. But I have an idea. We could assign our windrunners to another battlefield until the enemy arrives at yours, forcing them to waste skybreakers guarding their ships for days. A clever idea, Kamakal said. With Oath Gates at the Shattered Plains and Thalen City, we can transfer troops between battlefields as necessary. He glanced up toward where the Azish contingent had been earlier. Considering, perhaps, Sigil thought, what the Mink said about Azimir being a tougher defense than it looked. It would be the only one of the three unable to receive support from the other battlefields, as its Oathgate would soon cease functioning. At least they'd have an entire army arriving to help in a few days. Sigil had to worry about stretching his Windrunners too thin. The battle at the Shattered Plains was going to be a strange one, full of so many fused, and somehow he had to lead that defense. We can use the Oathgates, Khan noted, but we will want to be very careful with them. We've had one too many instances of, wait, how'd these pesky enemy forces get here in the squishy part of my rear lines? I think we should assign some people to keep talking to each Oathgate spren to hopefully prevent any other defections. What do you think, Sigil? What did he think? He glanced at her and heard his spren's words echoing in his mind. Live that truth. Storm him. It was time to stop being unsure of himself, wasn't it? It was time to stop fidgeting. He'd been put in command. He needed to act like it. I think you're right, he said. And also, Ka, I have an idea about the defense of Narak, where I'm in command. It's a strange one, but I think it might work. Excellent, Ka said. If so, we should run it past the mink. Kamakal scanned the room. I have some questions to ask him too, but has anyone seen him? Storms. The little man had vanished yet again. The end of Chapter 21, Part 2, with a line break. We'll pick it back up with Part 3 after these short messages from our sponsors. Just kidding. Spoilers for Sunlit Man ahead. All right, so we get more about Sigil's personality here. Maybe some character growth going on.
Yeah, and we get his spren name finally.
Yeah, Vienta.
What was it again? Vienta?
I think it was Vienta.
Yeah.
Did I?
Vienta.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that nips a lot of theories in the bud that it was like auxiliary before.
That's true.
Wasn't my theory, but one I've seen before.
It wasn't my theory either. It was pretty clear in some man that spoilers.
Or well past that.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, it was pretty clear that he was a Windrunner with an honor spren, and then he broke oaths and got his high spren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
which the theory's still out there that his spren auxiliary could be Zed's, but then auxiliary would have to go through a major character arc ahead of Sunlit Man.
Yep.
Because he's a dick right now.
That's right. He straight up is.
Excuse my language.
No, you're good.
I
mean, this chapter is also setting up something interesting later, right? Whatever Sigil has planned for the strange defense of Narak, we're not going to get that for a couple of days at best.
Seems likely.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say right now that this is probably my favorite moment in today's readings. Just, him coming to terms with, like, he doesn't have to lead like Kaladin to be a leader.
That's right.
Which, as we're kind of seeing with Shallan, it's a theme that's carrying through this book already. We see Adolin, wanted to be like his dad without doing it how his dad would do it. Shallan, not like Kaladin. Sigil, not like Kaladin. It's a thing going around. And I think that's a really good lesson for Sanderson to explore.
I really like it. Make a good point. I'm worried that by the end of this, Sigil is going to lose his spren.
Sanderson mentioned that Sunlit Man is meant to be read between Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth.
Yes.
And he didn't... There's so many ways he could have worded it, where like, oh yeah, you need to read this after Rhythm of War, or you can read this after Rhythm of War, or you need to read this before Wind and Truth, or before book 9, 10, whatever. So I don't know. It's interesting that he chose like that phrasing to me.
That's fair.
There's definitely something, if not the big reveal or twist in this book, there's a big hint towards it,
I
right?
think you're right. I think you're
Yeah.
right. It makes a lot of sense.
I mean, we've talked about this, offline plenty of times that I feel like there's going to be a major schism in the Skybreakers,
Right.
um, where you're going to have the Nail Skybreakers and you're going to have the Zeth ones.
Okay.
And I think Zeth is going to split away from I am the law and this like police brutality
I am
uh,
the Senate.
line of thinking. And he's going to, because his arc has been hinting towards this, he's going to be I am justice,
Sure.
What does justice mean? What does that look like? Well, that is subjective. There is no letter to the law of what is justice, right?
Yeah.
Kind of have to follow your heart a little bit more. So
Yeah.
it's more of a Windrunner way of thinking, which when you have him spending a whole book with Kaladin, a Windrunner, you could see him maybe learning some lessons there.
That's true. That's a good point. That's a really good
And
point.
so I think Sigil will be like, you know what? I'm not a Windrunner. I'm not a Skybreaker, but I do like this way that Zeth is kind of taking it. I don't know what that moment will be for him. That's like, you know what? I have to lay down my sword, leave this order. I don't know what that would be, but I could see that realistically being what happens. If not
Sure.
now, then in the future.
That makes sense. Wow. I like it.
We'll see.
We will see. On to part 3.
Sure. While we're on the notion of Skybreakers, I did see someone had a really cool theory on the read along.
Oh, did they?
Izilel, I don't know if I'm saying it right. She wrote, so Skybreakers are totally waltzing into Urithiru after it gets emptied of troops, right? The omission in Sibling's assurances was very blatant. Sibling pretty much saying like the fused and the odium people can't come into my tower.
Right.
But Skybreakers are technically Radiants. They're just not on your side. They could very easily walk in, and that's a great theory.
That is
very scary.
Very scary. Somebody else suggested that in our comments.
Oh, nice.
Let me see if I can find who that was. Give them a quick shout out. And if you haven't, if you haven't subscribed to us, please click that button. We are looking to increase our subscriptions. If you haven't subscribed to Sandbox, go over to his channel real quick. It's the only way you're going to be able to hear part 3 of this chapter. Otherwise, it will completely skip for you. That's a lie. That you're but still, go do it. Go do it. All right. Texas Blade. All right, Texas Blade. Does anyone else fear that the Skybreakers will be used to take the tower? The sibling keeps the singers infused. The sibling means the singers infused have no chance, but would the Skybreakers be able to use Tower Light? Can the sibling deal with Stormlight users? So I responded to that comment. So we just saw Navani walk through the Fabrial room of like a ton of Fabrials. Yeah, they probably could use Tower Light, unless the sibling specifically can manipulate who can or can't use Tower Light. But like, they're able to manipulate air and temperature and water. So there are, I think, physical defenses that could be put in place that could drive human/radiant people out of the tower. It may not be as effective as what the sibling could do to singers and fused, but I think she could. I keep saying she. I think they could do some damage if they wanted to. What do you think?
I think it's possible.
I think it's possible.
Do you remember?
Do you remember? The way that we were last December.
Do you remember the feeling that Kaladin had that was in relation to Tower Light? Because I can't remember.
Was that calming?
Yeah, it was calming. I thought there was another passage where it was a little bit more specific, but I can't remember what it was. I know Stormlight makes you want to like fight,
and
kind of.
Yeah.
So this one's very calming.
That's right.
So I wonder if that would have an effect on the Skybreakers. I also wonder if there's an underlying condition of sorts.
Right.
that like to be able to accept this calming presence, you need to have like something checked off that the
Good.
Skybreakers might not. But that
Yeah.
wouldn't make for a very interesting story. Like, hey, Skybreakers went to the tower. Oh, they got stopped. Just twiddle our thumbs here and wait for some reinforcements. Like, it's not really
Yeah.
climactic.
No,
So
that's
it's
true.
either they're going to go into the tower or they're not going near it. In my book.
Yeah. That's I hope we find out sooner than later because I don't want that to be a big old mystery and then it just fizzles out. I'd rather be
Yeah.
told sooner than later.
I mean, I feel like days like 7 through 10 are just going to be absolute chaos.
Yeah, we're actually only going to get parts named day 1 through 5. And then after day 5, it is just going to be day 6 through 10 is the thing. And it's all just, it's one chapter.
What do you think will be the longest and the shortest day in terms of page count?
Shortest day is going to be day 3.
Okay.
And the longest day is going to be day 8. What do you think?
Okay. I don't hate that. I think day 9. I was thinking like day 8, day
I was
9.
thinking day 8 or day 9. So I
Yeah.
chose the first, so you could choose the second.
There you go. I can tell you through my resources that through the end of day 2, and I think the second interludes, it's about 330 pages, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Um, which is already like on pace of like 12% of the book. So there's got to be a short, like a significantly shorter one in there.
That's true.
Um, yeah, so I don't know. It's
We'll
interesting.
see. We'll see.
We'll see. I think the book is like 1340, something like that.
Damn.
In terms of like the big, like bulky ones, like that we're gonna get day
Sure.
one.
The actual physical books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Printed in
Yep.
English in the US. And yeah.
Yep.
And it's going to go right there. Oh, wait. Right there.
There you go.
Read this before you
I
read
have
the
a I
things.
know a lot of people like to match their like sizes of books, and I do to a certain extent. It's the reason I haven't gotten the new bindings for. Oh, I can't point on your screen,
No, okay.
but the new Mistborn ones, they're not like even.
Yes,
Have you
that
noticed
one
that?
is slightly shorter than the other two. The
Yeah, and
Europe,
I
the
don't get it.
illustration,
I don't know why they would do
super
that.
obnoxious. I really hated that.
It's so
The only
obnoxious.
the only explanation I have is that because they did it during pandemic or it was coming out of pandemic, that somebody messed up a little bit.
It's so not
It's a
Dragonsteel to do
little
something like
annoying.
that. But
It's a
yeah,
little annoying.
it is what it is.
They still
Um,
look
you're
sick.
probably right though.
They still look
What's
good.
that?
They still look good. That art
Oh, they still look
style is
great. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah.
yeah. But I I have all the books that I read that were like already out at the time. So I came in at like I think 2017, 2018. So all the
Whoa.
ones that I bought were already out and they were paperback.
Got it.
And for all the new ones, I get the hard covers, right? The yeah, yeah, right. Was it
Yeah.
hardcover?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Um, hardbacks, hardcovers.
These words are accepted.
I get those ones for the for the new books. To kind of signify like where I started the journey, and like I'll
Sure.
never. I might like at the end of the thing, I might get all of them, but like
Yeah.
probably be like $1,000 something by that point. I don't know,
Yeah,
maybe
that's
more.
true. Yeah.
All like all 80 books of the Cosmere.
Yeah.
um,
It's somewhere around the 30, mid 30s, late
yeah,
30s. It's going to be great. Let's
but
go
yeah.
on
So
to
you'll
the
see like on my bookshelf, I'll have like Way of Kings, Rhythm, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, and then all of a sudden Rhythm of War and like Wind and
That's
Truth will
funny.
be the hards.
That's really
Just
funny.
like, why is that? Like, oh, that's where I started.
That's fair. They sell
Yeah,
sets sometimes on
they
pretty steep
do.
discount.
I'll get it. I'll get it at some point. It's
At
just
some
kind of
point.
like a sentimental thing. Like, oh, yep,
Yeah.
this is where I
I,
started. This was the
yeah.
first hardcover that came out when I like after I'd already caught up.
Yeah. This is the physical representation of my audio books.
There you go. Someone had a funny saying on TikTok. I forget what it was, but it's like my trophy case for my audiobook, something like that.
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Anyways, you want to move on to the
Let's
next bit?
let's do it. Let's do it to it.
Sweet.
Chapter 21, Part 3. Yasna, with Dalinar, Navani, and Fen, entered a room full of plants and bobbing lifespren. It had once been an ordinary room, but upon the siblings' awakening it had transformed. The stone of the ceiling looked transparent, replicating the sun, making you feel like you were standing beneath a skylight. But that sun didn't move and didn't match the true position outside. Fragments of glowing white light embedded in the stone made the walls and ceiling sparkle, and plants had begun to sprout from the stonework. Vines and rock buds, moss, and even grass in patches, all growing with incredible speed. I heard of this place long ago, Ivory said, his voice soft but audible from where he, shrunk into tiny size, rode on her earring. The tower likes to experiment with what a room should be, building strange landscapes. I thought the stories fancies. This is growing into something of a mess, Dalinar said from the center of the room, where vines were curling around his legs. Can we ask the sibling to tone it down? They'd rather not, Navani said. The room vibrated, and a quiet voice echoed from the air vents near the floor. It is a room for my sister, should she visit. A room for the Night Watcher. Very well, Dalinar said, with his firmest voice. His, you really should listen to me and do as I say, but I'll pretend you doing otherwise doesn't bother me, voice. We appreciate your willingness to make the tower function. I did not have much choice in the matter, the sibling said, but I did have some, so you are welcome. Queen Fen took a chair from those piled near some tables on the far side, pulling it free of the foliage. They'd used this smaller chamber off the meeting room for storage. Yasna stepped softly, trying to imagine the Night Watcher visiting, enjoying the abundance of life. Had it ever happened? The sibling and the tower had shut down just before the Recreants, over 2,000 years ago. When was the Night Watcher created? Yasna whispered to Ivory. We call her the Old Magic, but how long has she been around? When did cultivation form her? Before Ivory could answer, a voice whispered back from a nearby air vent. The Night Watcher came from the night, as the Stormfather came from the wind. Though, when I was young, the wind was different, so very different. When were you created, sibling? Yasna asked. Some 6,000 years ago, when the stones wanted a legacy in the form of a child of honor and cultivation, back when bondsmiths bonded not to Spren, but to the ancient forces left by gods. And the Stormfather? Soon before me. That's inaccurate, though, Yasna said. Dalinar speaks of the Stormfather having existed when people first came to Roshar 7,000 years ago. The Stormfather remembers that event and the detailed timing. It has been confusing, the sibling said, to learn of all that has happened while I slept. I knew the Stormfather when he was young. I, formed from the stone, which was the sibling of wind and night. The night left. Few loved her, or even spoke of her, and it seemed Mother replaced her with a being of some of the same essence, a new creature, unconnected to anyone's perception. Now the Stormfather has changed, and the Night Watcher has not spoken to me as she used to. My siblings are no longer as I remember. I hate that. Something about those timelines itched at Yasna, something that made her want to gather the other Varys Italians and set them to work, searching for primary sources. First, though, her uncle had something he wanted to say. She and Navani turned toward Dalinar in the center of the room, who had his eyes closed. It looked as if he were hovering beneath a sea of lights, grass rippling around his feet. Uncle? Yasna asked. I am not ready, he said, opening his eyes, to fight Odium. I don't know what preparation we can make, given the deadline, Navani said. A deadline you agreed to. Yes, I did. He seized a chair from the stack beside some tables draped in tablecloths, the whole pile shifting as he jerked it free, and Yasna heard a distinctive eep from them. They weren't alone. Of course they weren't. That girl seemed able to wiggle in anywhere. Yasna glanced into Shadesmar and saw Lift there, manifesting as a glowing light like a candle's flame. Alongside someone else? Curious. Even when I agreed to the contract, Dalinar said, setting the chair down for Navani, then fetching another, I was uncertain. But the chance was too valuable to pass up. Now that I've seen one of my mistakes, not preventing this assault, I fear there are more, regardless of what says. What is it, I say? Wit said, slipping into the room, carrying snacks. That was why he'd sneaked off, delaying them? Really? He handed her a plate of fruit. I hope whatever it is you said that I said, it was either nasty or clever, or both. I honestly prefer both. I am worried Odium will outmaneuver me, Dalinar replied. He glanced at Yasna and nodded toward the seats, with a question in his eyes. She nodded back, so he fetched her one. Curious how he'd changed. She'd read of times when he wouldn't have worried about anyone else. She'd known him throughout her adulthood as the man who would take care of people even when they didn't want it. Now, for the first time she could remember, he asked if she wanted his help, because he knew that sometimes she disliked it when people did things for her that she would rather have done for herself. She took her seat. Fen pulled over her chair, and Wit placed a small table and arranged food on it in an artistic way, because of course he did. Yasna realized, absently, that she was hungry. They had all likely forgotten breakfast in the chaos. Once in a while, it was nice to have someone take care of you. She didn't blame others for getting confused about what she wanted. She regularly confused herself, so today she enjoyed the plate of fruit. Wit brought over a chair and spun it around the wrong way before settling down among them. When in public, he acted the proper Wit, standing behind her chair, deferring to her. In a setting like this, well, whatever he was, it was above a queen or a high prince. He didn't need to say it. He could sit among them. They all knew it by now, including Fen, who looked at him the way one might at an eel that could strike at any moment. You are wise to be worried, Wit said to Dalinar. I am troubled by this new odium. The power will remember me and hate me, no matter who is at the helm, but the new vessel stole several of my memories, then let me assume that I'd bested them. This tells us a little of their personality, not gloating, though the power would probably have enjoyed that. The power can think? Yasna asked. Yes, Wit said. Ask your spren what happens if fragments of a god are left to their own devices for too long. They stand up, start walking about, and start riding around in people's earrings. They start caring. Each god is a slice of a greater entity killed some 10,000 years ago, its power divided. Those fragments have identities, intents, honor, the instinct to make bonds and keep them. Odium, a god's divine wrath, uncoupled from essential moderating factors like mercy and love. I met another one earlier, Dalinar said. On my way up here, cultivation appeared to me in the form of a woman. Yasna came alert, pala fruit halfway to her mouth. Cultivation spoke to you? She said. That's why you called me in here? I believe so, Dalinar said. She looked the same, sounded the same, felt the same. It could be a trick of some sort, I admit, but there was something about the meeting. And she said, Wit prodded. She told me I needed to seek the spiritual realm, Dalinar said. That I didn't need to expand my powers as a bondsmith so much as I needed to expand my understanding, particularly of the past. I cannot travel through time, but I can travel to visions. I can see how the heralds and radiants dealt with odium before. She implied I've been on this path for years without realizing it, and if I learn correctly, I will know how to defeat odium. Storms. Yasna thought of the wonder of being able to travel to other times. She dedicated her whole life to studying the past as a way to understand the future. Her efforts, though successful at times, had always been uncertain, akin to searching shadows for shapes to interpret. Through Dalinar's visions, she could see what had made those shapes. It wasn't actually traveling to the past, but the possibilities offered. Can you visit any other times, though? I thought the visions were more rigid than that. I thought so too, Dalinar said, but recently I've found the Stormfather's words to be full of, well, not contradictions, incomplete truths. Cultivation implied there was much more to see and learn. Everything exists in 3 realms, Wit said. Physical, where we live now, Shadesmar, the cognitive realm, where minds project their impressions. Finally, the spiritual realm, the realm of our souls, our links to our past and to other people. The spiritual realm is a dangerous, confusing place. Every event in the past still echoes in there, yes, just as the scars upon the body are a record of past wounds. However, when you travel the visions with the Stormfather, Dalinar, you do so in a very carefully prescribed way. To deviate from that course risks getting lost in a place with no directions, no lifelines, a place where even I, as one of the ancients, tread cautiously. Would it really be helpful? Navani asked. Dalinar, didn't the Stormfather imply that the visions can't show you anything he doesn't know? So what could you learn? It does seem like a risk, Fen added, for something so nebulous. There is more, Dalinar said, his hands clasped before him. Something else that cultivation said. What happened to honor, Wit? What truly happened at his death? I don't know, Wit admitted, his voice soft, arms crossed before him on the back of his chair. I was off-planet for the event, to my eternal shame. Other matters drew my attention, and I let the centuries slip away from me. He was erratic when I left. When I returned, he shrugged. Gone. The radiance broken, the world in turmoil following the recreants. I've been trying to catch up ever since. And do you know the location of his power? Dalinar asked. Wit didn't respond immediately. He took a deep breath and cocked a smile at the corner of his lips. So, she nudged you in that direction, did she? She did, Dalinar said. If we are to fight a god, would it not be best to have one on our side? Wait, Yasna thought. What is he saying? I have yet to know a person, Wit said, who took up one of those shards and didn't regret it, my friend. Same as any other burden of responsibility. Yes, Wit said, but orders of magnitude worse. He looked around the room, and Yasna noted Fen watching with wide eyes, not questioning, but obviously out of her league. They were talking about Dalinar ascending to the Shard of Honor. Storms. That seems like a big leap to make, Yasna said. Too big of a leap. I can think of nothing else to try, Dalinar whispered. What if we renegotiated the contract? Yasna said. They all looked at her. If there is a new odium, she said, he might agree to different terms. Perhaps he will stop the war entirely if we give him accommodations. She didn't look at Wit. What if we let him leave? Yasna, Wit said, pained. We can't unleash him upon the Cosmere. We have to at least consider every option, Yasna said. You said that the other worlds and the beings that rule them are content to leave odium to us. They offer no help or succor, and sometimes you have to think about yourself first. What if we renegotiated? No, Dalinar said softly. He took advantage of us once, and he'd only renegotiate if it served him better. He would do so only to take further advantage. I think we need to explore options outside the contract. Options like Honor's power. They sat quietly at that, and Yasna had to admit that negotiating the first time hadn't worked spectacularly. She looked to Wit, who slumped, offended, as he met her eyes. Keeping odium from destroying more worlds was one of his primary goals. Peace, she said, resting a hand on his arm. I am only asking questions, as I must. I understand, he said, nodding, and he did seem to. And what is put upon all of you is unfair. You have every right to be annoyed at the other shards. I certainly am. Dalinar, you have a good point in what you are contemplating. Dalinar nodded. I worry that I need something far, far greater than what this contest under any terms can offer. If you bring an army of 6 men against an army of tens of thousands, you'll lose. That's what I'm doing in facing odium. What if there's a better way? What if there's a way to fight odium? Defeat, destroy, exile him, using the power of a god. Yasna shivered and forced herself to consider it. She had known, even when no one else wanted to acknowledge it, that there was nothing watching or protecting them. All the aphorisms, rituals, and writings were for the comfort of the people at best, or the control of them at worst. She'd accepted this, though at times she had dearly wished for that comfort. Recently, in talking with Wit, she discovered the extent to which she'd been right. There was something up there, it just wasn't God. It was a group of ordinary people. She didn't know what terrified her more. The idea of some powerful, all-knowing deity that controlled everything, destroying her free will, yet for some reason still leaving the entire world in so much pain, or the knowledge that there were beings who ruled the Cosmere with immense power, but they had all the foibles, flaws, and limited morality of anyone else. After contemplation, giving Dalinar's idea due thought, she still found herself against it. Kings were bad enough. This was far worse. Dalinar, she said, I don't feel comfortable with this line of reasoning. Neither do I, he said. Storms, Yasna, neither do I. But we face a being of immense strength and intelligence. When I get to that contest in 8 days, they are going to outmaneuver me. I'm increasingly certain it will happen. So you're saying the only way to win, Fen said, is to face them as an equal, with the power of honor? Do you know, Wit, Dalinar asked, what happens to the power of a god when they die? It's different on each world, Wit said. On one it was all around, and we didn't realize it. In another, the god's power was stuffed in a metaphorical closet, packed into Shadesmar, left to rot. Here, if it wasn't splintered after all, then it's in the spiritual realm. I think it might be the very substance of your visions which behave so interestingly. Cultivation said the same, Dalinar said, that if I travel the spiritual realm, it will be all around me. But isn't it all around us already? Navani asked. In the Spren, the Stormlight, the power of the Radiance? Yes and no, Wit said. This is complicated. A shard, a god, suffuses everything. Every axon on the world is, in some way, connected to it. But the spiritual realm must hold a core of what honor used to be. A well of energy, you might say. If you were to connect to it in the right way, you would ascend to honor's position. Then all the ambient power of the world would be part of you. You'd need to find a way to persuade the power to accept you. And if I did want to do that, Dalinar said. Wit met his eyes. Then yes, the spiritual realm is where you'd start. Uncharacteristically subdued, he rested his head on his folded arms. Navani, did the sibling notice the visit of a god to their tower? Navani looked upward for a moment, then shook her head. The sibling says, however, that their mother is quiet, sneaky. Her kind tend to be, Wit mumbled, for all their enormous size. Tricky lizards who hide where you least expect them, like someone else I know. He took up an empty bowl, then threw it across the room toward the stacked tables. It hit the tablecloth covering one and smacked into something, which yelped. Dalinar stood and spun, toppling his chair, alert, with yellow shockspurn breaking around him. A fraction of a second later, he realized who it was. Lift? He said. Again? The head of a teenage girl popped out, with round features and long, straight, dark hair spilling around her face. A second head emerged from beside hers, much older, with a gray mustache. Dieno? Dalinar said, righting his chair and sitting back down. The mink seemed embarrassed to have been caught, though as usual Lift didn't care. She scampered forward and helped herself to the snacks. The mink stood up and straightened his clothing. You could have just asked instead of spying, Dalinar said. How did you get in, anyway? Vance, the mink said. And pardon, Blackthorn, the fatal problem with asking is that people can, and do, say no. Did you realize, Liv said around a mouthful of fruit, it's easier to get through a hole if you break your shoulder? Dislocate, child, the mink said. Dislocate your shoulder. She shrugged. Yasna watched the two, considering them. Lift had significant potential as a spy, and Yasna had contemplated encouraging her in that direction. The mink, though, he was too dangerous. He acted small, unassuming, but he was not loyal to her family, and she did not blame him. In his place, she wouldn't be either. I'll admit, the mink said, stepping up to them, I didn't anticipate a discussion of deification. Is it Buelo Arandan? The Alethi word is blasphemous, Yasna said. Ah, yes, the mink said. That. What did you expect to hear? Yasna asked, toying with a small green palafruit but not biting into it. A discussion of whether or not to assault Alethkar, the mink said, shrugging. Alethkar, Navani said. Why? If we win, we get it back, and your homeland as well. If you lose? The mink asked, looking to Dalinar. They keep both kingdoms, Dalinar said. If they control them, the mink said. The contract loophole works both ways, no? Wick cocked his head. I suppose, yes. If we were to assault and reclaim Alethkar before the deadline, it would be ours, regardless of the outcome of the contest. When you all scuttled off, the mink said, I assumed you'd seen this and didn't want anyone else to get their hopes up as you discussed. Reclaim Alethkar? She could help her people become a nation again, not a group of refugees. Yasna sat up straight and looked to Dalinar, who had hunched forward. He met her eyes, and she saw the truth in them, even before her own mind, scrambling to work out the logistics, did. It was impossible. Kholinar was in the very heart of Alethkar, fortified, home to thousands of fused and multiple unmade. They'd need to somehow deliver enough troops to accomplish the assault, pulling them away from every other fortified position, and the distances involved? The enemy's assaults were in places it could reach quickly. Thalena by ship, Azimir through Shadesmar, and the Shattered Plains via a smaller number of fused arriving by air. Reaching Alethkar on such short notice would be... well, it simply couldn't be done. Not unless they pulled every Windrunner away and risked everything on this one gamble. The logistics of it are impossible, I'm afraid, Dalinar said. Kholinar is too far away and too well fortified. And Herdaz? The mink asked. Barely any fused. Spy reports say they've moved most of their military away, following the collapse of my rebellion. He stepped closer to Dalinar. I could reclaim it. We're going to reclaim it, Dalinar said, when I win the contest. Pardon, Gaucho, the mink said, but I just overheard your reservations about the likelihood of that victory. Even if you were confident, I should not like to trust our freedom to another man's sword, no matter how comically large said sword might be. He stepped closer, holding something, a tattered remnant of a banner, one Yasna knew he kept in his pocket. You are to be commended for remembering Herdaz in your contract, Blackthorn. I no longer think you will forget us, as the Alethi so often have. But you gave me a promise. I should like it fulfilled. First, Alethkar, then Herdaz. If you cannot send armies for your homeland, then our promise comes due. I would like to try, and I should like you to keep your oath to me. Troops, support. 8 days? Navani asked. You want us to deliver troops to a nation hundreds of miles away in 8 days? The fourth bridge, the mink said. Your flying machine. Would take weeks to travel that distance, Navani said. Windrunners, then, the mink said. They can get a person across the continent in under a day. But an entire army? Navani said. We need a few hundred at most, the mink said. The members of my personal army, which we have rescued. If you drop us at the border on the western side, we will assault the capital a little inland, reclaiming my homeland. He placed the tattered remnant before the Dalinar on the food table. Your oath, Blackthorn. He stared at it. Damnation. He was going to say yes. Dalinar, Yasna said, look at me. He turned from the banner, meeting her eyes. Even an assault force of 200 would require some 50 Windrunners. Windrunners we need to protect what we have. There are barely 300. You can't send so many of them on a quest like this. That would make you, no offense, General Diano, of the 10 fools. I swore an oath, Yasna, Dalinar said. But what are we if we don't have our word? Dalinar said. Diano, we could use your knowledge in the upcoming battles. Are you certain you must leave us? Yes, he said. I won the campaign in Emul for you. Now prove you're no longer the man who burned my lands in your youth, Dalinar. Keep your word. Dalinar nodded. I will set 50 Windrunners to the task. Go, with my blessing. The mink took back his banner, held it in a fist, then gripped Dalinar's shoulder in thanks. He rushed out, not looking at Yasna as he did. Damnation. She liked the man Dalinar had become over the years, since they had made a connection reading The Way of Kings after her father's death. But this version of him could be storming inconvenient at times. She took deep breaths to banish the anger spren at her feet. This is right, Yasna, Dalinar said, settling in his seat. We must always do what is right. Those Windrunners will return before the deadline and join the battle. In the meantime, we've kept our oath. What is right, she said, is not so easy as swearing an oath, uncle. It's about what brings the greatest good to the most people, and sometimes that requires making difficult decisions. What makes you think, he said, that wasn't a difficult decision? They continued to lock gazes, Yasna's will against his, until a slurping sound distracted her, and she turned to find Liv standing next to her, watching the two of them like it was some puppet show, a dozen pellafruit pits in her feet and another wiggling in her mouth. Storms above. How did that girl manage to pack down so much so quickly, and be so frighteningly skinny at the same time? So, Liv said, what you're saying earlier, gonna become a god, eh, Dalinar? Deevy. Real Deevy. When you do it, can I put in some requests? I kind of hate how toes feel, you know? Whenever I remember I have them and start thinking about them. Can you fix that? Also, make porridge taste like meat and vice versa. Wait, Fen said. What? Porridge. Should taste like meat. Why? It's all slimy and gross. Meat, it comes out of a body. It should be slimy and gross. Innards and blood and guts and stuff. Meat should taste like porridge. She spat out the last pit, and Yasna noticed that remarkably, all the snacks Wit had brought were gone. So, fix that. Also, war and death and stuff. Actually, there are a whole lots of things the Almighty should fix and hasn't. Wonder if he gets distracted by all the prayers. The fact that he's dead, Navani said dryly, might be the most distracting part. Dalinar suddenly sat up in his seat, then stood again looking skyward. The storm, father, Ivory whispered in Yasna's ear. I feel him near. What? Fen asked. The storm father has overheard our conversation, Dalinar said, and he's not happy. I might need a few minutes. The end of chapter 21.
Whew, that was a doozy.
Good God, man. Good almighty. Storms, damn it. That was long.
Sorry.
You know what? We set ourselves up for this at the beginning of August. We know what we're doing.
Yep.
Boy, we got... So here's what's going to happen. Prediction time. Diano, the mink, is just going to disappear with 50 Windrunners. We're not going to hear from him at all until the very end of the book. Dalinar is going to lose, but they're going to have reclaimed Alethkar somehow. Like, the mink is going to go reclaim Alethkar, and nobody's going to know that it happened. Calling it.
That'd be kind of cool. I don't know if something that drastic would happen without our knowledge of it, but
Probably
maybe
not.
if there's like a really cool reveal about it.
One interlude. One interlude has the mink facing off against 3 unmade and winning.
No. It's just Lift watching from like a hole in like the wall at it all.
Oh, no. Hold on. Here's
whatever the mink does, just her watching and like eating snacks.
Well, she's going to be in the spiritual realm with Dalinar, and she's actually going to take up the Shard of Honor.
I don't hate it.
But
but also no.
Yeah. Maybe we try not to do that. But I do think she's going to end up in the spiritual realm.
There is much to talk about for this chapter, and I'm probably going to have to dip after this. But
myself gonna be all by myself.
I'm just going to get these out of the way.
Hit me.
Okay, we finished this chapter. The arches for this one has Pala, the patron of the Truth Watchers, and Taln in the 4 spots.
Okay.
And the attributes of Pala is learned and giving, and her role is scholar. Taln is dependable and resourceful, and his role is soldier. And since this is like a huge chapter where a lot of battle plans are happening, I feel like those two make sense for the strategy of it all. I am wondering why the Else Color one isn't in there. I forget what her traits were. I don't have the list up anymore.
Why?
Tartar sauce. I'm gonna get those up real quick because I forget. Which one? is it this one? Oh, apparently she's creative and honest. Is that right?
Huh.
Wait, this one's Dustbringer. That's Etch Dancer. Paula, yeah, Shalosh, right? She's the Elf Caller who turns into Dustbringer, right?
We assume, yeah.
Yeah, creative and honest.
Hmm.
I could see her working in there as well. Maybe they're just saving for like the 4 slots being like 4 different people for later.
Yeah. Could be.
Also, Batar, the Will Shaper, is. Oh no, not wait. No, she's not the Will Shaper. That's Wait, maybe I got these mixed up. Um. Oh no, Batar is the one. Sorry, wait. Batar. Coppermind. She's the Else Scholars. Oh, okay,
Oh.
Batar is wise and careful. I feel like she would have made more sense for this one.
Yeah. From
Hmm.
Yasna's point of view, yeah.
I mean, what's like, hey, be careful about taking up a
Yeah.
shard.
Yeah.
A lot of wisdom in this chapter as well. Yeah, and also Yasna point of view, kind of a missed opportunity. I wonder if there's a reason for it. I need like an annotation on just like why they choose like the arches and like the title names that they do.
That would be really
He's
nice.
so he's so fascinating.
But
It's
hey,
like it's like that show where like the making of
oh
shows.
yeah,
They do
yeah,
it for like
yeah.
House of the Dragon and Marvel and stuff. It's like
That would be good.
this is why we did that.
That would be very fun.
Yeah,
But there was a big reveal. Uh
so a bunch.
yeah, so you were totally right about the stone, right? Being
Yes, stone.
one of the spren, like the
Mm-hmm.
ancient,
Or the
right?
ancient. Yeah. Yep.
Entities that were spren-like entities. So we have the wind, the
Mm-hmm.
night, and the stone.
Makes sense.
The night
Night is
walker.
interesting. I feel like all our minds went there, but does Nightblood have anything to do with that? Is he the blood of
Uh,
Night,
I don't know. Wasn't that didn't
or
wasn't he
blood
formed
being like
like
relation?
way? Wasn't he formed way before? I thought maybe not way before.
Doesn't matter because Night was from the very beginning.
That's true. I think they just call it Nightblood because it's a black sword. Like night is dark, but still really
How
cool.
often does Sanderson do something just willy nilly with no reason? That's my thing with this one.
I see your point. I see your point. That's fair.
I still want to know why it's called Else Caller. I don't get it, and I feel like we're gonna have to wait till book 10 to fully
Because
understand this.
because both of their surges have to do with Shadesmar, and Shadesmar is elsewhere, and they're calling it forth.
Interesting.
I thought that was
Calling upon like the Else world.
yeah, especially like if you think about like the first people who did it, they were like, "What the hell is this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What
Interesting. Ah,
damnation?"
okay.
Yeah. Whereas
Finally, a good reason for that name.
you're welcome.
I now all I need is for someone to call it Else, like the Else world or Else realm or whatever.
Huh? That would be good.
You know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'd be like Shade Caller. Boom. You know what's interesting is Mar, right? In like I think Italian and Spanish
In
means like the
Greek,
ocean
it does. Yeah.
in Greek, right? And then shades obviously is like
Obviously, shade, right? Like dark,
yeah, dark, the night,
right?
right?
Right. Shadesmar is a good
Um
name for it. You know, marinara
uh,
sauce comes from that same like it comes from sailors eating food steeped in sauce. So marinate and then marinara sauce.
Interesting. I did
It
not know
does.
that.
Yeah.
The other huge reveal, which is super sneaky, is we have confirmation that at least of the siblings' understanding of history, the Night Watcher is her sister. So the Night Watcher
Yes.
is the third Bondsmith Spren, which there's been a lot of theories that it's actually not the Night Watcher, it's whatever
Right.
was before her, which would be, I guess, the stone, or it was Ba'ada Mishram, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But no.
I
So it seems like we have our three. Bottom Ishram could be a likely fourth,
right.
but we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah. And then I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with the mink and Alethkar,
Yeah,
if anything.
yeah. I feel like like before this book, I wouldn't have considered him a main character,
Right.
but now with him being so involved and Downer leaning on him more than you would have expected, we have to see more of him.
I completely agree.
Yeah,
Especially now that he has a name.
yeah. Deanno.
Yeah.
Well, we got that last
Did we?
in the last book.
I must
Yeah,
have missed it. You know what? It was probably
it
because
was like mentioned once.
I listened to it, so it probably
Hmm.
just ran by me and I didn't
Yeah,
hear it.
it's also not helpful that it's like in the same like time where like people are talking about like Dunny and stuff. Like
Yeah,
I don't know, it kind of just fades in the back. Do you
sure.
know?
They are setting it up for the Night Watcher to come to Urithiru. So if the Skybreakers pop in, maybe the sibling sends out a call for
Well,
help, and the Night Watcher
yeah.
comes in and is just like strangles all of them with vines.
So wait, so the Stormfather is from the
From
Wind,
wind,
Night Watcher's from Night, and then Sibling is from just
stone.
Stone. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, interesting. I was gonna
Yeah.
say like if the Night Watcher has Stone in her, then it'd be weird for her to move, but no, she's Night. So
Yeah, she's night. And then I liked how cultivation turned her into something that was more palatable, but like disconnect, like everybody
it's
forgot their preconceptions.
yeah, it's so odd that like Night is like you have like Wind and Stone. You'd think the next one would be like Earth or Fire or Water, right? But then you get like
Right.
Night. It's odd. It's not like your usual like spirit
Mhm.
or elemental type thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I would think water would be one of them, but then,
it could be unless these are like the three and there's no more.
yeah, which, threes and tens on Roshar, threes and tens.
I was thinking it might be nine, which is where how Odium like he created his
Right.
like false versions of them based off those, but I don't know.
It really could be. I mean, yeah, we still could connect Unmade to Spren-like creatures. We could.
Yeah.
I think their possibility is there,
Hmm.
but
We also get a lot of the like a little bit of the timeline, and Yasna kind of tracking it. I
it's
think I
something
mentioned
is
last
off.
week that
Yeah.
she would be important to go to the spiritual realm and watch the visions of the past because she's like the encyclopedia of the characters and like she
Right.
understands like what they know. She'll identify the gaps in the knowledge that they see. And we see her kind of doing that and fitting that role with the sibling kind of shedding some light on stuff. Uh, so it's interesting to me that I don't think she goes, right? Based off the blurb at the back. She
Yeah.
doesn't go.
No, she
So it's
makes that hard
interesting.
decision, and I expect she's going to regret not participating to some extent. But I mean, that's just characters facing difficult things.
Yeah. There was something else in here that I thought was cool, and this is such a long chapter. I'm looking for it. Um, yeah, is there anything else comes to mind for you?
You know what? Listeners, we're down a person. If you think we should have talked about something, put it in the comments and we will bring it up next Monday evening when we record.
Yes. I was going to say if you wanted to read the next chapter and then discuss it, like the beginning of next session, I'm down, but
I think
I understand if you're busy.
so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it and then I'm going to give my thoughts and I am going to ask the listeners. So listeners, pay attention really closely to the reading because you and I are going to have a conversation and then we will pull the best and most interesting things out from the YouTube comments and the Spotify comments, and we'll talk about them um, next Monday if the chapters next Monday are short enough to do that. If they're not short enough, then we will figure something out. Maybe we'll talk about We'll find a different time to record about them and plop them onto the end of another bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know there are a lot of people that like our discussion specifically. They don't really care about the chapter. They've already read the chapter. So I'm going to try to do some discussion.
Um, Two things for this one. There was, first of all, Lift is hilarious. I understand why some people don't like her as a character and they're afraid of a whole book for her, but I love her. She's
Yeah.
hilarious, and I think Sanderson will find a way to tone it down a little bit. Um, and it's not like she's going to be the whole book. You know, she'll just be one of the main
Right.
points of view. Second, I think probably one of the best moments in this whole chapter, at least for this part, was that little moment where Dalinar doesn't like pull back the chair for Yasna, lets her like signify if she wants to do it herself or
Yeah.
something like that, right? That little moment showed so much character for both of them.
It
You know,
did.
Dalinar growing. You know, they've been spending time with their readings, and um, he's trying, he's caring, and he's applying that, you know, those lessons and that growth. And then also from Yasna's point of view, we kind of get to see how she views that, what she values,
Right.
and with that, like she's very independent. You know, she's kind of like she's like a toddler in a lot of ways, where they've just gained this newfound sense of independence, and they just want to exercise it every chance they get,
Right.
to the point where it's kind of annoying. And like Yasna annoys me more than Lift a lot of the time.
Whoa.
But I'm sorry,
No,
hot
that's fine.
take.
That's hot.
But it's also very in line with their order. They're very much about independence and like trying to reach their own, you know, self potential.
Sure.
So it's all the things just fall in line with these characters. And Sanderson, it's like it seems effortless, but it's not. And I admire it so much.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's a great point. All right.
Um. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I am gonna peace out.
Adios.
We will talk about the next one next time,
Sounds
and
good.
you guys can discuss it.
Indeed.
Sweet. All right. Take care, y'all.
Adios. Chapter 22. Looking for a third option. After we parted with affection the next day, I watched their cart roll into the distance, pulled by the father with 2 children riding in the rear, the mother striding with a pack on her back. Dust blew with them, for dust goes where it wishes, ignoring all borders. From The Way of Kings, 4th Parable. Kaladin had entered a world frozen in time. The first part of Shinovar, on the slope below the pass, was forested. He walked, silent, with Syl, passing trees that didn't so much as quiver, vines that let him step on them, grass that lay like corpses. Yet it didn't feel dead. It was vibrant, green, but docile. Kaladin crouched down to touch a clump of grass, which trustingly let him. He stood and ran his hands along a branch, which didn't tremble. He tapped several of the diamond leaves, each thick with water. It all seemed frozen, like he had had access to some strange surge that let him freeze a moment and wander around in it. He felt he could turn back and it would all burst into motion, withdrawing from him in an instant, like lounging troops snapping to attention when Dalinar entered the room. There were also no lifespan, despite the many plants. What a bizarre place. Bizarre and somehow wonderful? He should be unnerved. A land where the plants weren't afraid of you? Where storms didn't blow? Where you walked on soil springy beneath the foot, which made a dull thump when you stomped instead of a proper scrape or soft smack? He found it oddly peaceful, comforting. Did a deep part of him know humans had once lived on a world full of these plants? Or perhaps they weren't timid or stupid. Perhaps these plants were brave. At the very least, they had never known the tyranny of the storm, and so had never been forced to hide. He found beauty in that. It helped that Syl was delighted by the place. She zipped from tree to reed, to vine to grass to bush, a ribbon of light twirling and twisting while she laughed. Any time she was a ribbon, she shrank back to her tiny size, but she shimmered with a variety of colors. Zeth moved up alongside Kaladin as they walked, preserving their stormlight. The next high storm was days away, and Kaladin didn't trust Szeth's promises that the spheres would recharge as usual in Shinovar. After all, he admitted that during his youth, they'd almost never used them, instead relying on dangerous things like candles. Why in the world hadn't Shinovar burned down? So many plants would surely provide tinder. Kaladin's people used candles only during the weeping. Syl zipped past, doing a series of loops before going to streak through some of the tinkling leaves. The trees here were bone white with knots of dark brown, and Szeth had seemed amused when Kaladin had asked how many trees in his land wore strange colors. Most, it appeared, were the ordinary brown and green. "I'd have thought," Szeth said as Syl zipped past in the other direction, "that she would find this place dull. Wouldn't it be less fun to inspect plants that do not respond?" "Syl loves novelty," Kaladin said, "and she's probably having all kinds of fun with plants that are too slow to dodge her pranks." "Curious," Szeth said. "Here we don't ascribe to plants volition or thoughts or intentions as is common to your speech. I'm only now remembering how odd it was to go east and hear people speaking of plants as if they were animate objects with feelings." "As an inanimate object with feelings," the sword said from Szeth's back, "I think I should be offended." "No offense was implied, Sword Nimi," Szeth said. "Oh, good. I won't kill you then. Ha, ha." Both of them froze, listening to the sword chuckle to itself. Finally, they started forward again, along a path through the forest. It wasn't too overgrown, fortunately. Kaladin tried to imagine how hard it would be to get through here if the plants grew all together and refused to move when prodded. So far, there hadn't been much of a chance to talk to Szeth, what with the flying. Or perhaps Kaladin merely told himself that to delay the awkwardness. What was the best way to start a conversation? "Hey, sorry to hear that you're crazy," didn't seem appropriate. Instead, he tried, "Dalinar says you've had a rough time lately." "I wouldn't know," Szeth replied. "What do you mean by that?" "I do not consider a time rough or not rough. I simply do as my master commands." "And you don't wish it were another way?" Szeth eyed him. Kaladin approached a tree branch hanging low over a path, then rapped it with his hand, feeling foolish when it didn't pull back. He ducked underneath. "I am here," Szeth said, "because this is the next step in my progress as a skybreaker. My people, my land, need me." "So you're making a choice," Kaladin said, "not just doing as commanded. That seems good." "I was commanded to find a quest of relevance," Szeth said, "and this presented itself." He followed Kaladin under the branch, his shorter stature meaning he didn't need to duck nearly as far. He moved on ahead faster, as if finished with the conversation. "Storming man." Kaladin caught up. "So, do you want to talk about it?" "Eat. Life. Storms. Shouldn't this be easier?" "Dalinar says that things you've done have left you scarred, not only physically but mentally." "Scars exist," Szeth said, "but they are permanent once you bear them. So you endure, not only physically but mentally." "What if they aren't permanent?" Kaladin said. "Stormlight can heal physical scars. What if mental scars can heal too? If not remove them, then make them more limber, easier to bear." "That is irrelevant," Szeth said. "I do not need to be healed, as I do not deserve anything of the sort. I have killed, and I bear the weight of those killings. To wish otherwise would be to minimize the damage I have done. An insult to those who whisper at me from the shadows, calling for my soul to burn in recompense for the blood I've spilled." "Storms." "Szeth," Kaladin said, "you can't live like that." "I exist. I do what is needed. Eventually, I will no longer exist. That is enough." "But I will not speak of this further," Szeth said, eyes forward. "I know what Dalinar intends you to do with me, as I am not deaf. It is not needed." "He wants you to listen to me, though." "All he asked of me was to bring you," Szeth said. "Therefore, you are here. You, the one who nearly killed me, here, in my land, on my quest." Szeth looked at him in the overcast forest, those oddly shaped eyes of his seeming at home in dimmer light. "I trust Dalinar because I must," Zeth continued, so I am not allowed to resent you. Nevertheless, do not assume I will endure you trying to save me, Kaladin Stormblessed. Not all beneath your judging gaze are in need of your protection. Keep your attention on finding the Herald. Zeth turned and continued on, purposeful. Syl landed beside Kaladin and whistled softly, growing to full size. Well, he's something, she whispered. Kaladin gritted his teeth and stalked forward, and Syl walked alongside, not flying, instead imitating his posture. She seemed to think he should try talking to Zeth more, but storms, Kaladin understood the frustration of someone trying to force you to feel better. The sole person who'd ever managed it had been Adolin, and he had done so without pandering or trying to cheer Kaladin up. Somehow. Maybe Adolin should have come on this mission instead. Storming man. Regardless, Kaladin needed another tactic. He refused to manipulate Zeth into accepting help. All right, then, Kaladin said, joining Zeth again. Dalinar wants me to recruit Ishar the Herald. Any ideas on that? It is a wise mission, given by a wise man, Zeth said, but we do not know where Ishar, or Ishu Sun God, as we know him, is hiding. Plus, there is something dangerous in this land. My mission here involves a cleansing and retribution owed to the people of Shinovar. Can you tell me what you mean by that? One of the Unmade is here, Zeth said, awakened years before you became radiant, before the first oaths were sworn. My people have embraced it for some reason and welcomed in its darkness and its manipulations. How can you be sure it's an Unmade? Kaladin said. It took Dalinar ages to recognize the thrill as an Unmade. Because, Zeth said, before my exile, I met it. He paused for an instant. It began during my youth, with a rock. The others left, allowing Dalinar to confront... Wolfie, go. Wolfie, no. The others left, allowing Dalinar to confront the Stormfather alone in that garden room. He had grown accustomed to having the Storm... The others left, allowing Dalinar to confront the Stormfather alone in that garden room. He had grown accustomed to having the Stormfather in the back of his mind, like a thought, the kind of nagging, persistent one that hovered at the perimeter of your consciousness. The awful feeling as you waited for a battle report, already seeing that your side was faring poorly. Dalinar wished that his metaphor for the sensation weren't so negative, that his relationship with his friend was more like the others. Some of that was Dalinar's fault, because of events like when he'd forced the Stormfather to operate an Oathgate as if he were a common blade. It was partly the Spren's fault, like when the Stormfather had refused to help Kaladin at Urithiru a few weeks ago, and Dalinar had been forced to step in. They had their peaceful moments, but just as many disagreements. More, really, and often Dalinar could feel the Stormfather's rage flooding through him, as if he were a chasm during a flash flood. Like today, when the Stormfather spoke, the force of it made Dalinar's fingers tremble. What are you doing? The Stormfather demanded, his voice like thunderheads crashing against one another. What are you contemplating? I am exploring every option I have, Dalinar said, keeping his voice calm as he stood among the writhing plants. Like any good general. I heard you discussing honor's power, the Stormfather thundered. Why, Dalinar? Must you think so highly of yourself? You are ruining everything. Dalinar braced himself against the force of the words. Cultivation implied this was my next step, Dalinar said, and I agree. I fear that by myself I can't defeat Odium. A sudden gale washed over him, a completely impossible wind, considering he was in a small enclosed space. The wind seemed to blow away the room, turning it to stormlight, the walls, plants, spare tables all weathering away like sand caught up in a tempest. In a moment, Dalinar was standing in an empty, open blue, hanging as if in the air far above the world. It was a vision, like the ones that had propelled him on this course in life. His body would still be in that room, perhaps collapsed upon the floor, while his mind saw what the Stormfather wanted. an open sky, and a figure building before him in the shape of dark clouds extending in both directions to the horizon. A face manifesting in the natural shapes of the billowing clouds, features he knew as the Stormfather's, bearded, though the hair vanished into the mixing and turning clouds. Inhuman eyes glowing with crackling lightning, a daunting, oppressive sight for one who hovered, tiny before it. But Dalinar had been in the imperious general staring down a subordinate. He knew these tricks. "Is it possible for me to take up honor?" Dalinar demanded. "No. Wit says otherwise. Wit is a liar. He has offered us more help than you have. He cares only for his own plans, Dalinar, not for this land or its people." Unfortunately, Wit had said as much to Dalinar in the past, so he considered and he tried to modulate his tone. "Why hasn't the power of honor taken another vessel in all this time?" he finally asked. "I will not give you answers, Dalinar." The Stormfather's voice grew softer, smaller. "You were supposed to be better than this. You were supposed to be better than your brother." "My brother?" Dalinar said, frowning. "He was arrogant. I knew it. I've watched both of you for a long time, even at his worst, though. Gavilar didn't strive for godhood. Why, Dalinar? Why must you seek this?" "Because I'm overwhelmed, Stormfather," Dalinar said, letting his exhaustion show. "Because I have to somehow save everyone, but I'm just one man, confused and outmatched. Because the only time I've ever felt like I had any hint of control was when I stood up before Odium and touched the spiritual realm." "Unity," the Stormfather said. "Yes. This is not for you to seek or decide. The power cannot go to one who wants it, Dalinar." "You said it was impossible earlier," Dalinar said. "Impossible the way you want it to happen." "And Cultivation, who brought this plan to me in the first place?" "Traitor. She should know the implausibility of what she suggests." "So which is it, Stormfather?" Dalinar demanded. "Is it impossible or merely implausible? Is it wrong or is it the only way to unite people, as I've been trying all along?" This is not my plan." "Your plan?" Dalinar pushed. "I thought this was Honor's plan. You said he charged you to find people for the visions, so they could prepare for the coming dangers. You're filling a role just like me." "You have no idea what you are talking about." "I only know what you've told me," Dalinar said, feeling his anger mount. "I know that I've been stymied and cut off every time I've tried to make progress. I've had to fight you almost as much as I fight our enemy." "Honor's plan." "Honor abandoned us," Dalinar shouted. "We don't even know why or how. All you'll say is that he died. He faded away. He left visions and some plan for us to force Odium into a contest of champions. Vague, without real instructions." "It's working, though." "Is it?" Dalinar said, gesturing toward the continent far below. "You've seen what the enemy is doing." "I know now." "They've outmaneuvered us already," Dalinar said, "and they will do so again." He heard thunder and found he was growing. When he spoke, his own words were punctuated by rumblings. "The enemy has changed, Stormfather, but whoever they are, they're a god and can match whatever I try. You don't think he can? What if he brings a fuse to fight me? An unmade, a thunderclast, some being from off-world with the power to tear down cities and lay waste to thousands. You think I can defeat that in some contest? I'm going to lose unless I find some kind of edge. All along, we were so focused on getting the agreement from him that we didn't consider how to win. Is it any real surprise that I'm looking for a third option? So are you going to help me for once or keep standing in my storming way?" He caught off 100 more thoughts running through his head, each with an attached frustration. He stopped the tide, breathing heavily, and found that, strangely, he was now the same size as the Stormfather. That was an impossibility, since the Stormfather extended to infinity. But in this place, reality bent, and he could look the Spren straight in his eyes. What you want is dangerous. It's not what I want, Stormfather, Dalinar said, but it might be the only way. The Stormfather rumbled softly, and he glanced down away from Dalinar. What of the heralds? Perhaps the heralds can help. I sent Szeth and Kaladin to try to retrieve one, Dalinar said. But what do you think? Can they solve this? Maybe. But they are not reliable anymore, are they? Time has broken them. I've broken them. He looked back at Dalinar. I cannot say if the power would accept someone like you as a host after what happened with Tanavast. And what happened with Tanavast? Dalinar said. It's worse than I told you, Dalinar. So you lied. Yes. Does that surprise you? Anger you? Dalinar took a deep breath and found that he was relieved to finally get an admission. Yes, Dalinar said, but I can move beyond that. The Stormfather rumbled, and the Dark Thunderheads calmed. I am supposed to be better than lies, Dalinar. I should be constant. I am the winds. I do not lie. You are a person, Dalinar said, capable of growth, capable of learning. If that is the case, then you are capable of mistakes. The Stormfather at last met his eyes again. I do not know what would happen if you became honor before the contest. I do not like even thinking about it. However, you might find answers that will change your perspective. In the spiritual realm, as Cultivation said, you can take that step and see the past, but do not seek the power of honor. Be warned. I will not be able to control what happens to you, or where you are taken. It is a process that is confusing to any who is not themselves a shard of Adalnasium. Even your wit, for all his boasting and self-importance, can barely fathom the spiritual realm. Regardless, if you look into the spiritual realm, you will see. Perhaps you will see. See what, exactly? Our shame. The vision vanished in the blink of an eye, and Dalinar found himself back in the tower, standing up remarkably rather than having collapsed. Wit was there, sitting on a table with one leg up, next to a fern growing from the floor. Could you see that? Dalinar asked. I could hear it, Wit said. He's both right and wrong. I do care about all of you, Dalinar. But Odium remaining captive on our planet is more important to you than any of our lives. Wit nodded. I'm sorry. Do not apologize, Dalinar said, stretching, exhaustion spren buzzing around him like insects. I appreciate the honesty. People think I detest honesty, Wit said, because they don't often like to hear what I have to say, and so must assume I speak only lies. They'd probably enjoy it more, Dalinar said, if you didn't present both truth and lies in a way that belittles the listener. Fair enough, Wit said, hopping off the table. I assume you've decided to go forward with this plan. Yes, Dalinar said, realizing it was true. I want to start as soon as possible. You'll need a way to track time in there, Wit said. Even if we do this the smart way, which means sending your mind but not your body, it would be easy for you to let months pass. That obviously won't do. You have appointments to keep, after all. Months? Dalinar said. If not years, decades. Time is entirely different in the spiritual realm. Storms. In some corner cases, you could vanish for what feels to you like a few hours, while decades of time pass out here. The visions so far were carefully curated and monitored by your spren, preventing you from being lost. Is there a way for you to monitor us? Wit fished in his pocket. He brought out a little clock with 2 straps on the sides. The symbols on the face were unfamiliar to Dalinar. Silverlight Mercantile, Wit said to his questioning glance. Adjustable to local time on different planets if you swap out the face. Here, let me see that thing on your arm. Dalinar held up his arm, where he still wore Navani's Fabrial bracer. It had a mechanism that kept the time and the date for him. All right, it said. This should work. You know how you do that thing where you teach yourself languages by bonding to a religion? Do that, but with the clocks. Could you be clearer? Do that isn't much to go on. Take my clock's soul, Wit said, holding up his, and connect it by a thread of power to your own clock, grounding yours in the physical realm while you travel. Wit looked at him. Poke this with Stormlight, then poke that. Try it. Dalinar drew in Stormlight, then touched Wit's clock, infusing it with power. When he took his finger away, a line of light followed. He touched his clock, and something seemed to snap. The dial quivered for a moment, then continued as if nothing had happened. Excellent, Wit said. So the clock on your arm will show the same time that mine does, Wit explained. The date as well. Without this, your clock could adapt to your perception of time in the spiritual realm, meaning it might feel and read like an hour has passed, but in reality you could return here and find all of us dead and gone. Well, everyone else, I tend to linger, rather like a winter cough. What about winter makes one cough? Dalinar asked. Oh, right, Wit said. Roshar, no common cold. You have no idea how wonderful life is here, do you? Are there places worse than the one being threatened with utter domination by a dark, destructive god? You'd be surprised, Wit said. A few have political fundraisers. He strapped on his clock. We'll try a quick test. So long as we keep you tethered, time shouldn't pass too outrageously for you compared to us, and you should be able to send your mind into a vision, then return as you wish. Should be able to? Should be able to, Wit admitted. No quip. That was always a bad sign. You'll need to open a perpendicularity, Wit said. Step into it, then let the light take you. But not all of you. Push all the way through, but only with your mind, or else you'll end up in Shadesmar. Storms. That sounded difficult and confusing. But what else was he to do? Let's get Navani and Yasna in here to monitor me, then we'll give it a try. The end of chapter 22. So, listener, I think that the epigraphs for these chapters are pointing towards Dalinar and monarchy in general moving away from what the standard is right now. The Noadon talking about how he lied to them by not saying that he was the king and that he had abdicated that throne stands out in that way. I really think Dalinar is not going to be king of anything by the end of this. I'm not sure Kaladin is either, or Yasna, or anybody, but that's what I'm taking from it. I'm not sure who the Herald is. There's all four. I think it's the Skybreaker Herald for looking for a third options chapter heading. Probably has to do with both Zeth and the Stormfather being weird about it. It does seem like we're finally going to be able to see what happened at the Recreants, not just why the Radiants gave up their spren, but the reason why, which from Oathbringer it seems like Yasna already knows, so I'm confused about why she hasn't told them yet, but maybe that's a whole like, oh yeah, I already knew that, so that it confirms that what Dalinar is going to see is true. Wit here mentioning Silverlight. Whoop whoop. Silverlight Guide. That's us. It makes sense that they're doing a Days of Future Past with Dalinar just sending his mind. That's pretty smart. Maybe that was what Cultivation was talking about, where he may actually have a way back. It does seem now that the Stormfather talked both in capitals and in like all capitals and then normal font, and it does seem like he talks a little softer when it's not all capitals, obviously. We get admission that he can lie. We haven't gotten anything about him being a Shar or anything, so I'm not sure that theory holds up. But please point out anything that I may have missed. We'll talk about it more, hopefully next time if the chapters are shorter. I really liked the Zeth and Kaladin chapter. I bet the next chapter is going to be a flashback. or in the next two will be a flashback for Zeth, and it's neat that we're going to be able to see an Unmade. I bet it's the one that destroyed Amia, but I'm curious as to see what actually it is. So, with that, I will say good night.